Jason, how are we doing today?
Doing good, Mark. Last night I was a little worried. There was a lot of rain. It kind of rained nonstop last night. Lost power through the night in the 50s. So when I woke up this morning, it was still pretty cloudy. So I was, a little nervous on about, from a weather perspective, how the game would actually turn out. But it turned out to be 70s. Not a whole lot of clouds in the sky. Come, when the game kicked off. So beautiful weather in Norman. And it was really a good culmination. Really, I think we're all blessed to see spring football back in action, just overall for us to have a topic to discuss. And so yeah, it was a good time. And I think really one of the big positives, and certainly we'll get into all the the details, but I think one of the big positives that as a fan and as a coach kind of want to take away from spring is no injuries. And I think they came out pretty healthy. I didn't see any limping or anything like that to the sideline. So I think they came away pretty healthy outside of the spring game.
Jason, before we get to the nuts and bolts of what you saw on the field, just in regards to the atmosphere, how many people were allowed to attend the game? What was the general environment and vibe around the game?
Yeah, there was a lot more excitement, Mark. I think that you could see, I think, last year during the season, Oklahoma only allowed 25% capacity to most of the games. And I think the atmosphere was maybe a little subdued. A lot of people still wanted to enjoy football, but at the same time, still concerned with being, right in the middle of the pandemic. And certainly not that we're away from it now, but you could see, I think there was a little bit more excitement in the air. Just from having spring and having a football game again, even be it as a spring scrimmage. So Oklahoma allowed 25% capacity again for the spring. So I think there was an announced crowd of around 22,000 there. So I mean, it was what you would expect for a typical attendance for a spring game. Certainly a little bit less than Oklahoma has had in the past, but I think the atmosphere was solid in what you would expect. And what amounts to it is a kind of a glorified, practice spring scrimmage.
Folks, we got Jason Ray on the line from Last Word on College Football. He's making his way back home from the Oklahoma spring game, so we are going to take advantage of his firsthand knowledge of the game, as we do each and every Friday. And of course, Jason is going to be available here now for the next 45 minutes or so to take your comments and your questions. And want to let you know that I just posted a video on the Texas A&M spring game. I've got a number of other spring games I'm going to look at. Tennessee and Texas will be posted tomorrow. I've checked out North Carolina, Boston College, and more to come. But Oklahoma for the next hour. So let's start at a place where we shouldn't normally be focused on, because the starter's set, but at the same time, it's great to have that backup in place. And usually you want a veteran backup at the quarterback position, somebody with some reps. But in the Oklahoma situation, they've got another inexperienced but extremely, extremely talented quarterback.
Yeah, Caleb Williams has come in and is very, very highly recruited, very thought of. A lot of the people around here are very excited about what he can bring from a future perspective. And I think, coming in, we've talked a little bit about just him in terms of, exactly how good he can be, what is his, trajectory, at least early on in the year. And, maybe a little bit better than, projected early on. And he certainly looked the part. I think probably individually, he might have been the most impressive kid overall in the scrimmage. I believe he was 11 out of 13, 120, 130 yards. He had a few carries, ran the ball very well for 40 yards. Lincoln Riley even said after the game that he was a kid, that has been way more decisive this game. He was more decisive this scrimmage than he has at any point during the spring. So really, really good to see him, perform that well in terms of that kind of an environment for him. Looking at a kid that came in early, should be in high school right now, but was one of those guys that really wanted to be on campus early, really wanted to be part of this quarterback competition. Now, certainly, there's not going to be a competition. Spencer Rattler is very well entrenched as the number one guy, but I think he's a guy that fans, coaches alike would be really interested to see if something were to happen to Rattler, if he had, he went down with an injury or something like that, he would be a guy that people would be comfortable, looked like a seasoned veteran out there, directing the second team offense. So really played well. I think he's a guy that I think most people would be excited about. Certainly would expect him to be the number 2 guy this year. Certainly would expect Riley to get him in at least 4 games, to potentially preserve his redshirt season. But, depending on what happens, could certainly see him in some packages, specifically in the run game, quarterback run game for Oklahoma this year.
We've got Sam and we've got Sean in the live chat. Both are talking it up in the trenches, most specifically looking at the offensive line because of the skill and the experience along the defensive front, and how the offensive line, as maybe the most concerned area of either unit, how the offensive line looked today.
The offensive line didn't look quite as shaky as I thought they would be. Certainly there was a couple of kids out. Anton Harrison did not play. Tyrese Robinson as well did not play. So, aside from that, they didn't look. They looked a little at times, a little unsettled, really, because it's probably a group that hasn't played together a lot, and but they didn't look quite as bad as I kind of thought. Not bad in terms of play, but just in terms of really just not being able to play together as much during the spring. So you got the chance to see Wanye Morris at a tackle perspective. I think one of the things that's interesting, and some of the people might be able to comment that was able to watch the game, it looked like Andrew Rame took almost all of the first team snaps at center. He's a guy that we kind of talked about a little bit with Chris Murray, and being the kids, the first 2 kids that, may potentially look at being a replacement for Creed Humphrey at the center position. Andrew Rame looked to be the guy that looked to be a little bit more settled, more seasoned at the position, like late in the spring practices, and certainly that came to fruition there during the spring game. So yeah, I think the offensive line is certainly going to be a work in progress. Not quite as unsettled as I thought they might be, but still definitely a unit that has the opportunity to learn and to grow and to get better much quickly.
William Loffer is going to the extent of saying that it looks like you could plug in Williams and not miss a beat. Your thought? My thought, without seeing anything, is, of course, the spring games are extremely vanilla.
Extremely vanilla. And I think one of the things that you noticed, watching that game, at least live, you could tell that the defensive line wasn't going 100%, and they were still flying around the ball. And you have so many classic overreactions in a spring game, and I think naturally the backup quarterback is almost always the most popular guy on campus. So, with the amount of hype that Williams had coming in, so I think he's a kid that, most people wanted to see and most people was excited to see play well. I think that certainly remains to be seen. Yes, could there be a quarterback competition come fall? I mean, sure. I mean, stranger things have happened, but I don't think, unless he makes a dramatic, additional step forward and then Rattler takes a couple of steps back, that you'll see any sort of competition. But it's not to say that he won't get in the games and he won't get some of that much needed reps during the season, just to help him as he goes into 2022.
It's our Oklahoma spring game post, courtesy Jason Ray from Last Word on College Football. He was there at the game, joins us every Friday to talk Oklahoma football, and we appreciate him stopping by in the car coming home from the Oklahoma spring game. And again, we're going to have spring game recaps from all over the places. I would say that there were more teams in action this afternoon than at any point in college football, including the rival Texas Longhorns. So we will talk Texas football and post that video tomorrow. All right, Jason, anything else that stands out in regards to, I know that the last 2 times we had you on, you ran down the number of players that were going to be missing from today's game, which obviously compromises the look of the team and what you can really gather and evaluate. Did it lend itself to opportunities for other guys to step up and maybe show you something?
Yeah, I think so, Mark. I think, particularly probably more so on the defensive side of the ball, there was quite a few guys that were out. Isaiah Thomas didn't play. Jalen Redmond didn't play. At linebacker, Brian Asamoah didn't play. Cornerback Woody Washington didn't play. So particularly when you talk about the secondary, a couple of kids that really played well and got their opportunity to play well. Latrell Mccutchen, we talked a bit about him, true freshman from Austin, Texas. He played a lot. He played very well. I think the one great cover corner so far played well today, just from a cover perspective. I think the one thing that's going to be key for him is to get in the weight room in the offseason. He looks the part. He's tall, 6'1". He's a guy that could be a great player for Oklahoma. When, that kind of remains to be seen. But, I think a really important summer for him. He does have the opportunity to, to fight for some playing time in that back seven, or that back four from a defensive secondary perspective. Another guy that really kind of played a lot, who played really well, is Billy Bowman. Again, another true freshman. Right now, I think if the season started tomorrow, you'd probably pencil him as a starter at the nickelback position. Played really well. Was locked up with Marvin Mims a lot during the game. Marvin Mims only had a couple of catches. A lot of reason why was because he was blanketed by Billy Bowman. I think you have a couple of schools of thought, right? You have the thought that, Oklahoma's been able to bring a lot of young talent in, a lot of good 4 or 5 star talent in over the last couple of years. So that's good. Pushes some of the older kids to, compete a little harder and just know that it's not, the position's not there for them. They have to work for it, as you end spring and go into the summer and certainly fall camp. But then you also look at it as, how comfortable are you when you're, when you're going from a national championship run here? How comfortable would you be having a true freshman start at nickelback? So, I think you kind of look at it both ways. But I think one of the things that, at least I came away from the game is how much depth that they have. It's one thing for us to talk about it, week after week, but it's one thing to really see it in play. The defense was really dominant against the first team offense, which is something, I think you talked about the environment. I think it's something was a little, eerie, looking around the stadium and thinking about the defense is playing better than the offense. Like, when has that ever been the case? But it was, for, 3/4 of the game, the defense pretty much controlled the game. And thinking about how many starters Oklahoma had out on the defensive side of the ball certainly will have people excited, looking forward to this team in the fall.
It's something we talked about the last couple of weeks, and maybe it's something we should sit on for the next couple of weeks until we see some names that are out there. But of course, guys on both sides of the ball across this roster and across the nation are going to be assessing their position on the depth chart after they get through the spring session and get through the spring game and have those conversations with their position coach and really size up their spot and what kind of playing time they were given to make a determination on transferring. And of course, as Jason outlined for us yesterday, a number of those situations have already come to fruition just in the last week at Oklahoma. Mike Woods coming in was not able to play in the spring game, of course. He won't be in session until this summer.
Right.
And we will continue to talk Oklahoma football with all of you throughout the summer. You can get your free team mask at voiceofcollegefootball.com, Oklahoma included among 35 teams. And even if you don't want a mask, please go to voiceofcollegefootball.com. Check out our new site. We would love you to take part there. We've got a lot of great ideas on how to build it out over the next few months. Also, check out Jason's work on Last Word on College Football. So let me pull up his banner right there. Jason Ray, lastwordoncollegefootball.com. They're a great support to me and our channel here. Both Jason, Kevin McGuffey, Tony Siracusa, and the rest of the crew there at Last Word on College Football. So I would think, Jason, what are you going to have available concerning the spring game there on Last Word?
Yeah, so tomorrow we'll probably have something that kind of take probably looking at about 5 takeaways of what to look forward to in the fall as we exited the spring. And I think certainly a lot of talk on the defense and certainly a lot of talk on the offense. And I think to your other point around transfers. And I think it'll be so interesting, I think, Mark, going across the country, not necessarily just at Oklahoma, but just across the country, now that we know that some of these kids won't have to sit out, they'll be able to play immediately. Is there a lot of movement that we see between the spring and the summer? I think one position, kind of remains to be seen. Riley was even asked about the Trajan Bridges and Seth McGowan conversation after the game in his postseason press conference, and he was very, very pushed back, as you would expect. Was really said no decision had been made on their future completely, and I think he was really going to talk about the legal proceedings and see how those actually work out before he made a decision. So I think certainly those two kids are still in flux, not sure where they're going to be, come fall. But I think should McGowan and should Bridges not be on the team in the fall, the one spot that you might see Oklahoma look at in terms of just adding a little bit of depth could potentially be at the running back position. We've talked about this. They've got 4 scholarship guys, and you've got one of those scholarship guys is a movement from the H-back position, and Mikey Henderson. So you have Eric Gray, you have Kennedy Brooks, you have Marcus Major, and then you have Mikey Henderson. Not sure how comfortable they feel with only four scholarship guys. Specifically, you're thinking about Kennedy Brooks, the kid that's coming back from an opt-out season. Like I mentioned, you got Mikey Henderson. So I wouldn't be surprised if they looked there to add an additional kid. If not for anything from a depth perspective, because you always seem, especially at Oklahoma, they seem to almost every single year they've had a kid or a couple of kids that's kind of got injured, or that's kind of questioned that depth. So, specifically this year, I wouldn't be, it'll be interesting to watch as we go into this late into the spring, into the summer, see if they make some changes right there.
Jason, you've talked about Eric Gray in pretty glowing terms, and I understand a lot of that is just kind of passed on based on the information that you gather that's coming out of spring, and of course having pretty high expectations of a guy who was the starting running back at Tennessee and a top 5 rusher in the SEC. Is it just that he looks like he belongs in a rotation or at the head of a rotation, or does he look that decidedly better than the guys that have been the starting running back at Oklahoma in the last few years?
Yeah, he's a different back, Mark. I think the difference is from an all-purpose perspective. I mean, he's not going to run you over. He's not going to wow you with his size like a Ramondre Stevenson, or he's not big like a DeMarco Murray or something like that. He reminds me a lot, just watching him for the first time live in person. He reminds me of more of kind of like a Joe Mixon, very shifty. Can catch the ball really well out of the backfield, blocks well from his running back position. Oklahoma started the game. They went in an empty 5 wide receiver package, and they had Eric Gray out wide, and he caught like a 13, 14-yard catch. He scored he scored a touchdown late in the game, made Jordan Mukes miss, or completely whiff. So I think he's a guy that Oklahoma trusts to be able to be that all-purpose back. DeMarco Murray's talked a lot about this in the spring, just in terms of wanting a guy that's more of an all-purpose guy. I think, from the guys that you saw, to me, watching him this game in live and in person, I thought he was clearly the best back on the team. Kennedy Brooks, he looked like a guy that was off a whole year. Not that he was bad, but he just looked a little bit rusty, a little bit stiff from my perspective. So this will be a big 4 or 5 months for Kennedy Brooks to get back in playing shape. Certainly he's going to help them. Certainly he's going to be in that, that 1-2 deep for Oklahoma. But, going into it, I think there was some thoughts, Kennedy Brooks is back. He's a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher, 2018 and 2019, and then you have a kid that's really played well at Tennessee at a team that's really kind of underperformed offensively, but not sure exactly what he would bring. So I think Oklahoma has a good 1-2 punch and even a third punch there with Marcus Major, but I think, to me, coming out of this game, you have to assume that all points considered, his ability to be shifty out of the backfield, catch the ball out of the backfield, and do everything that, Riley wants the running backs to do in the system to have that opportunity to be the number one guy this year.